like ours, we do have a lot of pieces to it. We have youth programs. We support the youth. We have an oration contest. We have an essay contest, scouting, JROTC. It's all about getting the kids to understand their role and honor our patriot ancestors as well. So it's about that history. It's about that education and informing the public about what we do, how we do it, and then honoring our ancestors and living our lives in a way that honor our ancestors. So it's great to see everybody out and joining us today. If you have any interest, please let me know. We can talk to you a little bit more about the organization. But it's great to be here, and I'll turn it back over. Thank you very much.
And just a show of hands, how many SAR members do we have here today? Woo. Excellent.
I saw some DAR, yes.
And next person I want to bring up is a good friend of mine, my partner in crime, and truly the brainchild behind this event. He's the one who is both my sounding board and the one who both pitches crazy ideas like this to me. And that is my good friend and president of the Colonel George Waller SAR chapter, Mr. Andy Doss.
Thank you so much, Jared. I appreciate it. I was looking back at some notes over the weekend where we first started planning this, and you may not notice, but the reason why we had this event started was because Patrick County actually one-upped us last year. They did what they called a round table, and I saw how successful that was. I guess that was like in January, February of 2025. So in March, I told Jared, I said, man, we should do something like that. And we were knocking around these ideas. And first we called this a round table. That's what it was. It's funny, this somehow became a symposium. I guess because it made us sound smarter, I think, to call it that way. Anyway, just want to tell you, I'm glad you came out for these things. We've got these good speakers. Jared and I both had the pleasure of meeting some of these speakers over the past few years and getting to know them so we can speak to their knowledge and ability to tell you something that you may not have known. With that, I'm going to step off, and Jared, thank you so much.
And maybe we got away from the round table to not confuse people with Civil War stuff. So, but without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our first speaker, because I don't want to waste any more time up here. So today our first speaker is Mr. Thomas Sobol, and I'll let him introduce himself more here in a second. But we first encountered Thomas back in, actually, I believe you emailed me before South Boston. He is big in looking at the descendants and those who fought in the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And I had an ancestor who fought there. And then we ran into each other at Crossing of the Dan, actually in the Mobile Museum when it was in South Boston. And we kind of put this together a little bit, but I won't take any more away from him. So ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker today is Mr. Thomas Sobol.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Bear with me while I transfer the feed over here. Cords are just long enough. So I serve as the supervisory park ranger at Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. I've been there just over 2 years now. And just within 6 months of my time there, I became aware of the opportunity to be a part of this national project. The National Park Service, obviously the agency that my site is a part of, and the National Archives and Records Administration are collaborating on this huge citizen archivist project. There are a lot of different ways you could be involved with the National Archives. You could transcribe all kinds of different documents from different time periods, military, civilian topics, immigration records, court records. But obviously during the 250th, and given I work at a Revolutionary War site, I wanted to assign volunteers every pension record associated with the Battle of Guilford Courthouse and try to get all of that data in one place. At Guilford Courthouse National Military Park, we did already have a couple of databases, so a couple of local chapters of the Daughters of the American Revolution had already found through revoirapps.org, which has partial transcriptions of Revolutionary War veterans pension applications, mentions of the battle, like 2,000 names, and then we also had still a card catalog from a previous generation of park rangers in the 1990s, so none of that data was on computers yet and easily searchable. So with these two incomplete databases, I was frustrated when descendants, like some of you all, show of hands, how many folks are descendants of Revolutionary War veterans? Keep your hand raised if they fought at Guilford Courthouse. Okay, still that's pretty good number, pretty good proportion of you all. That's awesome. And those descendants come to us, and I gotta search through card catalogs like it's 1990 when I was 2 years old. It felt very dated. So we're trying to, streamline things. Now we have an Excel spreadsheet with 2,500 names of American veterans who fought at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, and they're broken out by individual sheets in that one spreadsheet. The North Carolina militiamen, the Virginia militiamen, the Virginia Continentals, Maryland Continentals, all the kind of units I'm going to be talking about during this program. And you can see where they were living at the time of their enlistment, the dates of their enlistment, their age at that time, their residence when they applied for the pension application, when they received the pension, obviously their rank, their unit, and how much money they received. And that was really associated for the militiamen in terms of their duration of service and their rank, and then for Continentals it was a lot more uniform. If you were a private in the Continental Army, you'd have been getting $96 per year, which when they started issuing the pensions in the 18 teens was a lot more money. They never really adjusted for inflation. You never got a bump up. You're still living off that same $96 later in the 1840s, if you're fortunate enough to live that long. And in the case of a lot of these veterans, they luckily did live long enough. You're always so fortunate, and it's just a blessing that you read a document and you see this gentleman applied for a pension in 1832, received it, and passed away months later, a year later, a couple of years later. Because think of just the amount of time that's elapsed. It's 50 plus years after the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, and they would have been 66, at the very youngest when they're applying for a pension, because youngest you can be in the militia is 16. Obviously, some of them lied about their ages. There were certainly younger kids fighting in the Revolutionary War. And then there are sometimes men 100 years old applying for pensions, and sometimes talking about service in the French and Indian War. So within the last 2 years, that project that I wanted to launch was an incredible success. We were really the only Revolutionary War site specifically advertising volunteer opportunities to transcribe a specific subset of pensions. So there's a very successful national initiative, and it's gotten a lot of great media attention. A USA Today article that really prompted it to go viral. In fact, interviewed 2 of our volunteers about what the work's meant to them and the challenges. They decided that it would be kind of sexy branding for the article to talk about how reading cursive is a superpower. I just want to point out that all the comments online talk about how kids don't know how to read cursive. That is quite true, but a lot of our citizen archivists were actually youth. We recruited aggressively with history students, museum studies students, and universities across the nation. Most university students were in North Carolina for understandable reasons. We also had a ton of college kids all the way across the country in California volunteering with us too, because all 83,000 pension files have been digitized. They're all available online. You just advance the documents page at a time, input the transcription page at a time. It's a real short 9-page file. If, say, they're a Continental Army veteran with a good paper trail on them, they just have to say the bare minimum. This is my name, this is my rank, that's when I served. Maybe if they're feeling loquacious, they'll mention that they fought in a few battles and that they were wounded. And then later in 1820, they have to reapply to keep those pension benefits. Congress was a bit cynical, in my opinion. They thought that folks were applying for pensions when they didn't really need it, and these men were proud. This was really the first time the government was giving direct financial assistance to its citizens. these Revolutionary War veterans. So in 1820, they had to apply again and provide a detailed property inventory to prove their poverty. And that poverty was sometimes shocking. Sometimes they are stating that they really are a pauper and they just rely on the charity of their neighbors and that they just have the clothes on their back. But sometimes, I own 150 acres of exhausted land, detailed list of all the livestock they own, down to all the household possessions they own, by the number of forks and chairs and tables, and sometimes they even list the number of enslaved people they own. Within this whole process, it's been interesting to see also kind of the metrics. I didn't have any idea, on average, how many of these veterans were successful in their application. You can tell just by looking through the records. If the file begins with a letter S or a W, it means they were successful. It means either the survivor, the veteran, applied for and received it, or the last application was from the widow, starting W. And then there are some files that start with R, and some of those mean that a pension was never awarded. And that explains the difference I have here on the screen. If you're really great at doing math in your head, 1,194 plus 740 does not equal 2,013. So we've identified as many as 2,013 pension applications in which the veteran or their widow or perhaps their surviving heir child mentions that a veteran fought at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And we're a bit more generous. We also included men who are fighting with the Army on that day of battle, but may have just been detached for scouting duty. Maybe they were foraging, maybe they got to the battle just as it was ending. Maybe they were guarding the baggage up at Troublesome Creek, several miles to the north of Guilford Courthouse. So our database is, for that reason, a little bit larger than the Daughters of the American Revolution local chapters, who really were just focusing on men in those three lines, that defense in depth that Greene had on the day of battle. So there are 79 other files that I read and couldn't make heads or tails whether or not they fought in the militia or the Continental Army, and it's because it's almost never the veteran himself describing the service. It's a child or a widow who just doesn't remember enough of their husband's service. Or it's the very few cases of what I suspect are fraudulent claims where the veteran is just really talking nonsense. A good example of one I can remember is a gentleman who said, "Yeah, I fought at Kings Mountain under George Washington." George Washington commanded the Southern Campaign? No. So this guy is making stuff up. That's one that, judges didn't award the pension. So overall, a pretty high rate of pension approval, 81%. You can see the Continental Army veterans, they were awarded their pensions at a higher rate, 89%. Militia pensions a bit lower at 79% success rate. And that's just out of these couple thousand Guilford Courthouse stories. Obviously, it's nice to see the data. I'm kind of a numbers guy. My dad's whole career was finance spreadsheets. He scored a perfect score in the SATs and math. I scored a perfect score in verbal. I'm not bad at math, but it wasn't my favorite like my dad's. This is more my thing. Finding the individual stories that are so fascinating within these pension records. And these are a couple great examples of North Carolina militiamen. Private William Leslie, one of around 50 Guilford County veterans who, lived in the local area, joined the battle quickly, and he passed away December 23rd, 1832, just months after applying for and receiving his pension. He was in Oglethorpe County, Georgia, and you don't often get a veteran quoting one of the officers on the day of battle, so it's just very cool. You hope that this is very accurate, but maybe he's taking some liberties and his memory's not quite right. But he claims that Light Horse Harry Lee rode up to the lines and gave them a speech talking about he's referencing the earlier engagement at Newgard, and I've given Tarleton hell this morning, and we'll give him more of it before night. And yeah, just an amazing account. Earlier this year in late March, I had the privilege of being in downtown Wilmington when a new state historic marker was unveiled to Zachariah Jacobs, one of over 40 black veterans of the battle we've identified, and most of the proof of those men has come through pension records. And their descendants used that proof and other proof to go through the long, kind of laborious process to get a state historic marker dedicated. And he's just one of 2 black Revolutionary War veterans with state historic markers in North Carolina in their honor. Zachariah Jacobs, in fact, was captured at one point during the Revolutionary War and given the opportunity to accept a parole with the stipulation that you may never fight again, and if you fight again, we'll kill you. And he chose to enlist in the Continental Army and served a 1-year enlistment. Earlier, especially at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, he was just serving in the militia. He and his descendants were the subject of one of several homegrown history, PBS North Carolina, special documentaries, like 12 to 13 minutes long. And yeah, PBS North Carolina has been doing great work during the 250th, sharing very local stories. One of my employees, Ranger Tanner, has done a great job taking all the data I'm feeding him and making awesome maps. You can see these are all the counties who were represented at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, and this is kind of the breakdown of the men who lived long enough to apply for pensions. You have 55 men from Guilford County, that's the highest number, and then you've got Surrey County to the west, 29, Granville County, Chatham County, Orange County, those are all well represented. And then what's very interesting is how many of these guys quickly move. The men often mention that they've moved a couple times in between their residence during the Revolutionary War and then where they're living in 1832. And then sometimes the files continue and you see, 10 years later, maybe they started off in Tennessee at the time of their initial pension application and now they're in Missouri, maybe following their children further west and applying for a transfer of their pension to the nearest county courthouse. So you can see most veterans do move counties. A lot of North Carolinians do stay within the state of North Carolina. That's the #1 outcome, but the state that is the most popular destination for them is certainly Tennessee. And then you see a little bit of South Carolina, Georgia. You've even got some outliers in Louisiana, Arkansas. The Virginia militia. We've got Major Thomas Hubbard, and he just talks about how the battle went a little bit, and then what I thought was so fascinating about this pension application was he ends up running into Arnold later in Virginia, and he refuses to accept like a traitor's word of honor, and he will not talk to him about being paroled. He's just going to wait until he talks to Cornwallis. Private William Pendrick from Mecklenburg County, Virginia. He gives the story that a lot of Virginia militia fire even more times than Greene stipulated. Archaeology and other accounts really bear that out. The middle of the battlefield was thick forest, and that's likely the longest firefight within the 2.5-hour battle is on the second line. And a lot of the artwork that's up here is from some of Don Trelawney, a famous Revolutionary War painter's early work when he was working in watercolors. That was the basis of the artwork for our very first park film around the era of the bicentennial, when it was more a slideshow than a film. Ensign Joel Leftwich of Bedford County, Virginia. He is a great example of how the Virginia militia line, according to historians, also performed better on average than the North Carolina militia because they have a higher rate of prior Continental Army veterans, a prior rate of people who fought in battles before. Joel Leftwich had fought in the Continental line and all those battles around Pennsylvania. He's a veteran of Brandywine, Germantown. And at Guilford Courthouse, he describes in pretty great detail how they're kind of giving the enemy's flank fire, and during the retreat, and it's borne out by the side of the battlefield he's on with the amount of ravines and depressions. He twists his ankle and really struggles to keep up with the momentum of the battle given his injury, describing himself as kind of a crippled situation. But he does pay someone to ride behind him on their horse. So that's, you'd imagine in a battle they would give you a free ride to get away, but I guess this North Carolina mounted rifleman saw an opportunity. I don't know. We do have a few Henry County, Virginia militia stories. James Cotton, interestingly, is really more a Guilford County guy, but showing how many folks still have family connections in Virginia. A lot of these Guilford County men have family up here or may have just moved from here to Guilford County. While visiting his relations up here, he serves as a substitute, joins the militia unit, and then goes down to Guilford Courthouse and fights in the battle, more in a reserve role. Obviously, it's a lot of Southern Virginia being represented, but you also have a lot of riflemen from Bedford and Augusta counties as well. And then it makes sense. A lot of North Carolinians move west into Tennessee. A lot of Virginians move west into Kentucky. And you see more Virginians than North Carolinians moving into Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. And then for Pennsylvania, Henry County, this is where they're living post-war. Some of them are staying put, as you can see, and then some of them are headed as far out as Missouri, down to Georgia, some Tennessee, some Kentucky. Now on to the Continentals. Lieutenant Nathan Smith, he served at Gates Defeat, and that's, I really appreciate it when they mention Gates Defeat, because when they're applying post-war for their pensions, when they're listing their battles and their service, their memories can be confused, or they just disregard chronological order and they're kind of jumping around in time. So if you can kind of extrapolate, you can usually tell the difference between if they fought at Camden in 1780 or Hobkirk Hill in 1781, kind of second Camden. Both battles took place quite close to each other. So for Smith, I know that's Camden. And he ends up leaving kind of field command and ends his Revolutionary War service as a surgeon. Had medical training, so that was kind of cool to see. Private John Harrell is a great example of how sometimes the injuries suffered during the war are lifelong, talking about his disabled shoulders. There's a Delaware Continental who was shot through both hips and was really never able to manually labor for himself. A lot of those men who had such debilitating wartime injuries are being awarded pensions even before Congress starts passing acts to extend pensions to kind of first all Continental Army veterans of 3 years, and that gets more generous over the years. Frederick County is the most represented for the Maryland Continentals, and then Delaware Regiment, we've lumped them in as well. There weren't too many Delaware Continentals left really by the time of the Battle of the Guilford Courthouse, so pretty low number of them who lived long enough to apply for pensions. You can see they're kind of clustered more towards home, but some of these men, it seems like, if I'm ending my service in 1783 outside of Charleston, South Carolina, you see some Maryland Continentals who just choose to stay down there in South Carolina, or maybe come up to North Carolina. Private Charles Smith, he's a veteran who lives an extraordinary long life, passes away at the age of 91 in western North Carolina. He fought at Cowpens, fought at Guilford Courthouse, and was captured and taken prisoner at Guilford Courthouse, and wasn't exchanged until 1783. Private William Williams lives to the age of 75, and his explanation of why he doesn't have discharge papers to prove, I just thought was hilarious, really. He says that he sold them for 4 or 5 gallons of whiskey, which was all he ever got for his 18-month service. So if you didn't have that kind of like paper trail, you were able to have, witness statements to support your pension. So that is another source of proof for these men. Culpeper County, interestingly, was the #1 location for where these men were living. And most of these men were, like William Williams, 18 months men, meaning they don't now necessarily have as long period of enlistments. There's a great size roll of 18 months men taken at Guilford Courthouse in the fall of 1780, and a pretty good proportion of them were still with the Virginia line and fighting at Guilford Courthouse. And size rolls were really used by the Army to track down deserters. They've got detailed physical descriptions along with name, occupation, home county, that sort of thing. They're a great resource today for genealogists, family members, and historians. This is where the Virginia line men head, pretty similar to the Virginia militia. Just lower numbers so you can't see the trends as well. And then within kind of the groups of military units, you can see these stories that kind of cross through groups of very unique experiences in the Revolutionary War. And these two men are one of several who actually escaped confinement as a British, sometimes soldier, because conditions for prisoners of war were so grim that some men do make the conscious decision, let me enlist in the British Army, because they're always trying to get people to turn, and then I will desert as quickly as possible, because I obviously don't want to fight for them. Some men decide never to do that, but they might be dying on a prison ship in New York Harbor, Charleston Harbor, so they decide to take up the British on the offer to fight in their Navy or Army, but not within this conflict. So they go to the Caribbean where there's a high mortality rate, and very few of those men do survive to tell their tales of service. But Private Jacob Rooksbury, he's on a prison ship in the Savannah River, and as the Franco-American force in 1779 is coming to take Savannah back out of British hands, they're put to shore, and he's able to escape from the guards, and he finds the French army, and they direct him to the American army, and then he finds his way as a volunteer all the way to Guilford Courthouse. What's difficult with the escaped prisoners of war is they really never mention what unit they're fighting in at Guilford Courthouse. There's some South Carolina Continentals who escape from Charleston, and I don't know how you cut out a hole in the ship, hop into the water, swim to shore, and then have a crazy overland journey, eluding the British, eluding Tories, getting assistance, and finally finding the American Army, volunteering your services. And since there's no South Carolina Continentals really at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, where are those guys fighting on the day of battle? It's still a mystery. It would be cool to find that answer. And then Private Leonard Bean, he's one of a very small number who have both service in the Army and then naval service as well. So he survives Cowpens, he survives the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, then he enlists in the Navy, and when he's serving down in the Caribbean, he's captured and sent to Bermuda, where he's a prisoner all the way until the end of the war. And he gets exchanged through a cartel in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then another cool group of men, these are the men who start off the war fighting for the other side. And they become prisoners, and they choose to make this country their home, and they fight for the Americans. So William Smith, called British Billy by his fellow Maryland Continentals, he's captured at Saratoga, and then he enlists, and he, with the Maryland Continentals, comes down to the south. He fought in an earlier he fought at Monmouth, but as soon as, the winter of 1780 is starting. The Maryland Continentals get sent down from Morristown, New Jersey to Charleston. And fortunately, they don't get to Charleston before it surrenders, so they're the soldiers fighting at Camden, Guilford. He mentions Utah Springs as well. John Anthony Heidecker, definitely a very anglicized name. He's a Hessian. He was born on the River Rhine in 1748. He was living in Pike County, Alabama, and receiving his pension into his late 80s, but his exact death date and his final resting place are unknown. And I just wish his pension had more details. He basically says, I find it interesting that he mentions that he was imported. One of the Hessian troops imported into the United States, is how he puts it. But he is captured in New Jersey in 1776, maybe at Trenton. That's a big victory we have there over the Hessians. And then he settles in South Carolina. He says that he serves under Francis Marion, who was not at Guilford Courthouse, but there were some other refugee South Carolina militia at Guilford Courthouse, an incredibly small number, and really before this pension project, historians didn't realize that South Carolina militiamen were at Guilford Courthouse because a lot of them, under Andrew Pickens, left the Army just after Weitzel's Mill, a very large battle that is a skirmish when you look at the casualty counts, but when you look at the number of men involved, is a huge battle. And that was, less than 2 weeks before Guilford Courthouse within Guilford County. So I want to thank you all for your attention today. Thank you for the warm hospitality and the invitation to speak about this project. It's been a labor of love and just hugely illuminating. We've also taken some of these stories, the particularly compelling ones, and created a series of 2 to 3 minute videos, and this QR code will direct you to them to learn about some of the other stories that we've found through the pensions of Guilford, and that'll take you to our YouTube channel. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Hey, Thomas, can you mention this is the Symposium?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for reminding me. In March 2027, on the Sunday of our battle anniversary, we will have our second annual Descendants Symposium. That's where we were able to connect for the third time after meeting in South Boston. And that is where I invite a series of panelists to just share stories of their ancestors' service. And it's really an amazing community gathering where I'm just asking the questions, and these descendants are the storytellers talking about their ancestors' service. It's a couple-hour program in our visitor center theater, and encourage you all to follow our park and come and visit us during the March anniversary weekend next year. Thanks so much.
Okay, we will take a brief, let's just say 10-minute break or so you can stretch your legs. Feel free to use the bathrooms that are located right there. But like I said, we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes or so. This is also the last call for the door prize drawing. So if you have not put your name in yet, I'll put the slips back up here and we will draw once we reconvene here in 10 minutes. So feel free to mill about for the next few minutes. And also, Thomas has brochures back here for the for the Guilford Courthouse battlefield as well. So feel free to grab them on your way out.
Was that your whole thing? You headed out now?
No, just hanging up.
Oh, okay.
To watch Bill's presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. Making myself ready.
If not, we can find some somewhere.
So I came here,
Yeah. Yeah.
Exercise. I enjoyed you.
Appreciate that. Thank you, man.
That's what I did. said that.
very cool to be able to use a historic courthouse for this purpose.
Bob. Sweden, look at there. See, since I last saw him live, here's where he's been. He's been everywhere, man. Actually, I think she went to Canada to Niagara Falls. Whatever the border. Way more than I think we're running.
Going to Yellowstone?
Yes, I am.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
My cousin was driving.
All right,
my car
we'll go
got
ahead and
pulled
get
over
started
by
here.
a state trooper.
You all find your seats.
I'm starting a summer job in Alaska.
Okay, before we bring on our next speaker, I will do a door prize drawing here.
This is responsible.
So let me
They didn't
mix
offer
up
me
all these and not look at them. All right, so we got a few prizes here to give away. First one is going to Bob Tuggle. So Bob, you can have your choice between an American Revolutionary Award travel guide,
Oh, nice.
a Walmart gift card, or a gift card to Chick-fil-A.
Oh, the travel guy.
All right, there we go.
Anything to get me out of the house.
There we go.
Thank you.
All right, next up. Next up is Peyton Moore, Dr. Moore. Is he still? Yeah, there we go. All right, you can have your choice, Walmart or Chick-fil-A. All righty.
That's as good as money.
There we go. And our final door prize winner is Sharon Merricks. There we go. Thank you. Now, we also have two more prizes here today that are going to be somewhat earned. Do we have anybody here today where it is currently their birthday today? How about their birthday next week? There we go. There. When's your birthday? Thursday. All right. Well, come on up. You have won an early birthday present. You've also won. Yep. And before I give out this last one, I do want to brag on this book. This is an Explorer's Guide to America's Revolutionary War. This is a travel guide for all 13 states. It has different Rev War sites in each state, and it has different books in here. So if you want to continue your reading on it, it references books in here as well. But all 13 states. This was put together by a team at National Geographic during the pandemic when they were looking for a little extra work. They put this together, so very professionally done. The last one is going to be for the person who traveled the furthest to be here today. So who thinks that they traveled the furthest from their home to be here? Let's see. Where's Darren at? How far?
Fairfax.
Okay, can anybody beat Fairfax?
175 miles.
There we go. Well, Darren, you have earned
Now you learn something about the American Revolution.
Yeah, now we could teach them a thing or two about it. So, our last speaker today is Mr. Bill Guerrant, and I'm going to tell this story, and the folks who are in our SAR chat here have heard this before, but this is one of my favorite stories for Bill. So, when I was chapter president for the local chapter here, we were looking at bringing in different speakers to speak to our chapter, because originally it had been just chapter members just giving presentations and stuff, so we wanted to bring in somebody from the outside. And I just got through reading a couple of Bill's books that he had put out about, they're local history based, they're novels, but they're about local history. So I talked to Andy, I was like, hey, how about Bill Guerrant? He's local. And Andy's like, well, has he done anything about the American Revolution? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And it was literally the next week, he put out a novel on the American Revolution. Like literally within 7 days. So I contacted him, had him come speak to our chapter, and I was telling Andy's wife, Lori, about the book. And because she was getting ready to buy a copy for her parents, I think. And she was asking me about it and what I thought about it, and I was like, I don't typically buy novels because I think history is fascinating enough as it is. So I was like, this is one novel I could not put down. And I was praising this book, and I didn't know it, but Bill's wife was like right behind me. So I'm thankful I said a lot of good things about it. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce to y'all my good friend and great historian, great author, Mr. Bill Guerrant.
Thank you, Jarred, for that great introduction, and what a privilege it is to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I love being in this old courtroom. It is so cool. I spent 25 years plus in courtrooms, you know, when I was a lawyer before I retired, but never in one as neat as this. We have General Washington, we've got Patrick Henry, we've got Thomas Jefferson over there. What a beautiful place. Now, as many of you may be doing, my wife and I have been traveling all over the country, it seems, this part of the country, the northeast part of the country in the south. This year, hitting sites relating to the 250th, the semi-quincentennial, I finally learned to say that correctly, the 250th anniversary. And it's been great, inspiring, encouraging, how wonderful it is in this kind of divisive and cynical time to see patriotism being displayed and people with a genuine interest in history and reconnecting with this. And so it's been really great. Now, what I want to talk about today is essentially, well, let me back up. A lot of the events that we've seen, including one that my own local Historical Society put on a few weeks ago, have been oriented around the anniversary of the issuance of the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. Now, that document is revered by us as Americans. I mean, the language in that document in many ways defines who we are as Americans. It is one of the most important and consequential documents in human history. So, of course, to borrow a phrase, it is altogether fitting and proper that we should honor that document. But as I think Jarred might have mentioned in his when he was starting this program off, it's too easy, I think, for us to fall into the trap as Americans of coming to think that there was something inevitable about American independence. Congress declared independence in July of 1776. Yay, America is independent. What am I doing? Not doing it correctly. Can y'all hear me? How about now?
Just turn it on.
I thought it was on. All right. You want me to start over? No. How about now? Is it working?
I don't know if I was able to turn mine off. So.
Where's the technical? I was told to push a button, and maybe it's a different button. Oh, I see that it's on mute. I don't know. There you go. How about that? All right. Same button I pushed before, by the way. Let the record reflect. But look, declaring independence is not enough. I mean, to be perfectly honest about it, anyone can declare independence. To be independent, you have to earn it. You have to win it. You have to achieve it. So we have this beautifully brilliant and profound document that declared our independence. But that didn't happen because of that document. In fact, that document would be a footnote in history, except for the efforts of American patriots to earn and achieve that independence. And there was nothing inevitable about it. It took many years, hard-fought, desperate, perilous years to achieve that independence. We were, after all, taking on the largest, greatest empire on the planet. These farmers and shopkeepers, about 20 to 30% of them weren't even on board. Okay? And there were many times over those years when it appeared that not only were we not on the verge of winning independence, but we were on the verge of failing in that effort. Had Americans not dug deep to find the courage, the strength, and the will to continue the fight, we would not have won our independence, declaration or not. Now I want to focus, and there were many times, and one of the times, of course, most people think of, correctly, is the end of 1776. That year had gone disastrously after July, and George Washington's army had been evicted from New York, chased all the way across New Jersey, and it seemed that the war might be lost. And of course, we know there was that miraculous, seemingly miraculous victory with the crossing of the Delaware. But I want to focus on another time, when we were on the ropes as Americans, when independence was hanging by a slender thread, and American people did what it took to keep that alive. So let me start it this way. October 19, 1781, the British Army, commanded by Charles Lord Cornwallis, marches out into what we now call Surrender Field at Yorktown, lays down their flags, lays down their weapons, and surrender en masse to the Franco-American Army commanded by George Washington. That did not end the war. There was still some fighting and a lot of negotiating to go on, but that effectively secured American independence, at least in hindsight. That brilliant victory did that. But folks, if I had been standing here before you in January of 1781, here in Henry County or anywhere else in America, and I had said to you, no fear, by the end of this year, and 10, 11 months, Cornwallis is going to have surrendered his entire army and we will have won this war, essentially. You would have rightfully thought that I was out of my mind, because there was absolutely no reason to think in January of 1781 that we were on the verge of winning the Revolutionary War, and there was every reason to think that the Revolutionary War could very well be lost. 1781 is, in my judgment, the greatest turnaround year in American history. So let me set the stage for what it looked like at the beginning of that momentous year. As we all know, the Revolutionary War began in April of 1775 at Lexington and Concord. July of 1776, we declare independence. 1781 rolls around. Okay? It's almost 6 years since the war began. It's almost 5 years since we declared independence. How are things going? Well, let's start with the Northern Department. In January of 1781, General Washington's army is scattered in posts around New York. He's not able to concentrate his army in one location because doesn't have enough provisions to supply it. In many ways, that winter, 80-81, was worse than the winter at Valley Forge. Meanwhile, the British Army's in New York City. They're fat, they're happy, they're well fed, they're well supplied, they're well quartered. American Army is none of those things. At the beginning of 1778, Washington's army averaged 24,000 men. 24,000 men in 1778. By 1780, it's down to 14,000 men. By 1781, the beginning of 1781, it's down to 6,000 men. It's a quarter the size it had been 2 years earlier. Alexander Hamilton says to Washington, look, General, whatever we do, don't let the French see our army. Because if the French see our army, they'll lose heart. They'll think we don't have a chance. But it wasn't just the fact that the army was dwindling, enlistments were down, desertions were up. Things were about to get a lot worse. On January 1, 1781, the first day of this fateful year, the Pennsylvania Continental Line mutinies. These are some of the finest soldiers in the American Army. They say, look, many of us have enlistments that have expired, but we're not being allowed to go home. We're not being paid. We're not being fed. We're not being clothed. We're not being housed properly. Our families are suffering. Every promise that Congress has made to us has been broken. We've had it. And they arrest some of their officers. They kill an officer or two. And they begin marching on Philadelphia. They say, we're going to get what we're due from Congress at the point of a bayonet. Washington intervenes brilliantly, gets the governor of Pennsylvania involved, negotiates a resolution. Many of those men are allowed to go home because their enlistments had expired. The army is now smaller than it was, but the crisis is averted for 3 weeks. Because 3 weeks later, the New Jersey line mutinies. Same MO, same complaints. This time, Washington knows, I can't do this or I'm going to lose my army, one regiment at a time. So he's got to put his foot down hard. He's got to come down hard. He has Mad Anthony Wayne surround those men, disarm them, and then the mutineers are forced, with the rest of the army watching, to execute their leaders. A firing squad at point blank range. Does that sound like an army that's going to beat the British decisively several months later? Diminishing, demoralized army? Dispirited? It doesn't. But let's turn away from the north for now. I think we can all agree the situation on the north at the beginning of the year is bad, desperate. Let's look further south. What's the situation in the southern department? It's even worse. It's even worse than it was in the northern department. See, the British had decided in the late 1779, we're not getting anywhere in the north. We're chasing Washington around. We can never bring him to battle. He's too cagey. We need to turn this war to the southern department. That's where we need to go win the war. There's more loyalists there, they thought. And after all, those are the really valuable colonies. You know, there's a couple of ways commonly to negotiate the resolution of a war. One is you get a peace and you declare antebellum status quo. Everybody go back to the borders you had at the beginning of the war. Another way, the Latin term is utad pusideris or something like that. That means everybody keep what you got. The war's over, keep what you got. And the British knew if the war ends on those terms, if the French force those terms on us, we want to be holding the southern colonies because that's where the money is. The heck with these fishermen and these rebellious shopkeepers in New England. We want Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, the cotton, not cotton, indigo, rice, tobacco. That's what we want. So that's what their strategy is. We're going to move up from the north. We're going to take advantage of the loyalist sentiment there, and we're going to crush this rebellion from south to north. Savannah falls in December of 1779. The British move on Charleston, then called Charlestown. South Carolina, very important, one of the largest and most important cities in America at the time. They invest the city, they trap the American army inside the city, and in May of 1780, they force it to surrender. It's the worst American defeat of the Revolutionary War. One of the worst defeats in American military history. The Southern Army is essentially gone. The Georgia Continental Line, gone. South Carolina Continental Line, gone. North Carolina Continental Line, gone. Virginia Continental Line, gone almost. There was a detachment of Virginia Continentals under Abraham Buford marching to Charleston to help in the defense of the city. They got word that the city had surrendered. They turned around and started marching back to Virginia. Bannister Tarleton's not going to have any of that. He and his cavalry run them down at a place called Waxhaws, attack them, defeat them, and slaughter many of them after they had surrendered or while they were surrendering. Virginia Continental Line, gone. That's May of 1780. Congress, at that point, brings out the supposed hero of Saratoga, Horatio Gates. Many in America, including Gates himself, believed he was the greatest general in America. He was superior to Washington. They give him command of the Southern Theater. They tell him, go, block the British, try to save the southern states. Washington detaches from his army the southernmost continentals he has, Delaware and Maryland continentals, gives them to Gates, and Gates is told, go to Carolina, pick up all the Virginia militia you can along the way, all the North Carolina militia you can along the way, and stop the British. Gates does that. He comes through Virginia, he picks up all the militia he can through here, including the South Side militia. He goes to North Carolina doing the same, collides with the British at a place called Camden in August of 1780, and is decisively defeated. An important point to remember about this is that the militia Gates is commanding in that battle, Virginia militia, Carolina militia, but including the militia from here, from our part of the world, panicked and ran, threw down their guns, and in many cases did not fire a shot. Those men weren't cowards. They were very poorly commanded that day. Gates had no idea how to use militia. And those men ran. The Continentals fought bravely, but they found themselves surrounded and cut to pieces. This is when Baron de Kalb was killed. Gates himself disgracefully abandons his army, doesn't stop running until he gets to Hillsborough, North Carolina, and that Second Southern Army destroyed in 4 months. Now, a
Congress finally does something right. They ask George Washington, who do you think should be commanding the Southern Department? And he says he should be my Quartermaster General Nathaniel Greene. He didn't pick General Greene because of his vast military training. Greene was a former Quaker merchant from Rhode Island. His military training was equivalent to mine, that is to say he had none. But he was brilliant. And Washington knew it. He knew this is the right man for the job. But when Greene got to Charlotte to see the army that he was to command, he was absolutely astonished. There were only 800 or so men that were fit for duty of the 2,300 that were supposedly part of the army. Only 1,800 were under 800 who were adequately clothed. Only 1,500 fit for duty. They had not received a penny of pay in 2 years, the Continentals who were in the army. And Greene says many of these men, he said literally were wearing nothing but a piece of cloth tied around their waist, Indian style, a loincloth. You know, I always thought this image of the American soldiers in the Revolutionary War, you know, naked and starving, that was hyperbole, that was exaggeration, and sometimes was. But in this case, this is what he got. This is the army you're to stop the British with. Doesn't sound like the prospects of that are too good. But he gets to work with his brilliance and with logistics and begins trying to put together an army. Now, the British begin their move in January. We'll come back to that. So that's the situation of the Southern Theater. I think we can all agree it's pretty bad. What about Virginia? Virginia contributed a lot of military and political leadership to the war, but Virginia had not been the scene of a lot of fighting. Very little, actually. War had been fought in the north, been fought in the south. Well, that all changed on January 1, 1781, the same day the Pennsylvania Line mutinies, the beginning of this fateful year, because a British army makes a surprise landing east of Richmond and begins marching on the city, led by none other than the hated, notorious traitor, Benedict Arnold. Virginia's caught completely by surprise. In fact, when the reports come to Governor Jefferson, as the British army landed, and they're marching on Richmond, and it's led by Benedict Arnold, he didn't believe it could be true. That can't possibly be true. But it was true. The government had to flee Richmond. There was hardly any militia they could be mustered to defend them. They were essentially unopposed. They took what they could carry out of Richmond. They burned a lot of Richmond, and Arnold, pillaging and plundering his way back, creates a secure base on the peninsula. So now there's a strong British army marching around Virginia, essentially unopposed in January of 1781. I think we can agree the situation in Virginia is pretty bad as well. There doesn't seem to be any reason in those three scenarios I just painted to think that we're on the verge of winning this war. And I think an objective observer looking at this could say we're on the verge of losing this war. And our bid for independence is going to fail. But it doesn't stop there. It's worse. We think when we think of the Revolutionary War, a lot of us think of the Continentals against the Redcoats, and of course that was an important part of it. But there were 3 wars being fought. 3 wars in one, if you will. There was that one. But there was also the war on the frontier. There were the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, the Iroquois, the Creeks, the Shawnee. They were all allied with the British. And the British were encouraging them to attack settlers on the frontier to pin down American militia, to keep them out of the fight. Hundreds of attacks on families. Many families slaughtered on the frontier during the war. If you lived on the frontier, which wasn't very far from here, you had to add that to your daily experience during the war years. And if you lived here, for example, in this part of Virginia, and you could very well be called to militia duty. In fact, anyone from 16 to 50 was subject and would be called periodically, and you might very well be sent, and often were sent, west to the frontier to defend the outposts there against attacks from the British allies, Indian tribes. So you had that. Now, I mentioned, if you were a man or a boy, 16 to 50, you were subject to being called to militia duty, sent off to action with very little training, often with a musket without a bayonet, for example, and you might very well have to face the British soldiers, the trained British soldiers. You're a farmer. You're not a trained professional soldier. You do the best you can. But anytime you get called for that kind of duty, there's a good chance that you might not come back in one piece, if at all. not to mention the risk of camp diseases and that sort of thing. If you're a woman or a girl, that's your father, your brother, your husband, your sweetheart. That was daily life. And the home front couldn't have been much worse economically. At the beginning of 1781, we have the worst economic conditions in American history. Worse than the time of the Great Depression. There was almost no money in circulation. Congress had run out of money very quickly. Money in those days being gold and silver. So they started issuing paper money. They called it continental notes. It's the origin of the expression as worthless as a continental. They issued $1 million worth of these things and said, look, until we get on our feet, until we get this war won, use this as money. Circulate this among yourselves in business. Accept this as tender, legal tender. And people did. Patriotic people did. But by 1781, they had not ever redeemed $1 of that original million and had issued another $200 million in paper, which at this point was essentially worthless. Thomas Jefferson said this stuff is no more valuable than an oak leaf. But if the commissary showed up at your farm and said, that cow, that horse, that pig, your gun, we need it for the army. Here you go. Take this in payment. That's what you had to take. You were required to take it. People were beginning to lose heart. They were beginning to say, we're not winning, we're losing, and now I'm getting poorer and poorer. My things are going away. I'm putting my family at risk. And by the way, if the British were nearby, they'd pay in gold and silver. So you had that. So the home front situation was also very bad. And yet, that's the way the year began, but it ends gloriously. What happens? Well, this is one of those moments at the beginning of the year. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. When we were 5.5 years into having declared our independence, but now is the time, one of those times, when we've got to dig really, really deep and find the strength and the courage and the resilience to keep fighting, to keep going. And that happens multiple times around America, but I want to zero in on what happens the first 3 months of 1781 in the Southern Theater. It begins with the great Virginian Daniel Morgan scoring a decisive victory at the Battle of Cowpens. Morgan, I think, is in many ways could be considered the quintessential American. I won't go into his bio as much as I'd like to, but he defeats Tarleton decisively and takes about 600 prisoners in western South Carolina. Some of the finest soldiers in the British Army, Highlanders, Grenadiers, and he begins hurrying those men north to get them to prisoner camps, to get them out of the reach of Cornwallis. When Cornwallis finds out what's happened, and then lost all these prisoners, he goes after Morgan like a bat out of you-know-where, determined to run him down and get those men back. Nathanael Greene then begins an effort to concentrate his army. Cornwallis is pursuing. Morgan's army is going across North Carolina. They have to make treacherous and last-minute crossings of the Catawba River, the Yadkin River. We always talk about the crossing of the dam, but there were 3 perilous crossings of rivers during that campaign. Makes it across each time, kind of by the skin of his teeth. Greene unites his whole army at Guilford Courthouse, February the 9th of 1781. Gets them all together, and he says, calls a council of war, which he didn't like to do, so he calls all his senior officers together. He says, gentlemen, we've got to make a decision here. Greene did not want history to reflect that he made this decision by himself, because the stakes were extraordinarily high. He says, do we fight here? Do we fight Cornwallis right here? Or do we make a run for it and try to get across the Dan River, where we can resupply, reinforce, and reprovision? And these men in the room, Dan Morgan was one of them, these are fighters. And every one of them said, we have no chance. If we fight him now, we lose. We have to retreat. We have to try to get across the Dan River. Greene at that point comes up with one of his brilliant tactics. So he takes what he calls a light corps, detaches it from his army, and assigns command to Otho Holland Williams. Morgan at this point is suffering so badly from sciatica that he has to go. He has to retire. He can't continue physically. So Williams takes control. He says, take your men, Light Horse Harry Lee's Legion, William Washington's cavalry, and some Continentals I'm going to assign to you, and you're to make a run for the river, for the fords west of where it is now Danville, the Dan River. You're to lead Cornwallis in that direction, make him think you're the entire army, stay close enough that he can know you're there and come after you, but not so close that he can catch you. You lead him away like bait, and I'm going to take the rest of the army and make a run for Boyd's Ferry and Irvine's Ferry, which is what it now South Boston. Cornwallis could fall for that trap because Cornwallis had intelligence reports saying correctly that the upper fords west of what is now Danville were crossable at this time in the winter. You could get across. He says they can't cross at Boyd's and Irvine's Ferry because there's not enough boats there. But Greene had anticipated this scenario months earlier and had Colonel Edward Carrington, go out and secure every boat he could find on the Dan River, hide them from the Tory spies so they're there when he needs them. And Greene makes his dash for Boyd's Ferry, for Irvine's Ferry. Williams leads Cornwallis off on this chase brilliantly. Cornwallis eventually figures out he's being duped. He turns and he starts heading. He now knows what the game is, and he turns and starts heading toward Boyd's and Irvine's, and Williams does the same. I could talk for hours about the episodes on this race to the Dan. I'm not going to do that, thankfully for you. But there's some great books out there that can give you more information on that. John Buchanan's book, Road to Guilford Courthouse. Patrick Waters has written a great book, and I put those episodes in my book and fictionalized them. But these men, both British and American, were marching 20 hours a day on very little rations, in many cases with their shoes worn out, so they literally were barefoot in the winter. North Carolina at that time was a sparsely populated state, and you're in a sparsely populated part of it. And the British are following in the wake of a ravenous army that's already come through. So there's suffering going around. Cornwallis had long since burned all of his wagons and baggage train so he could move faster. So it is an all-out, desperate race to get across the river. And Greene makes it across the river in time. And even, seemingly miraculously, does Williams with his detached corps. Gets across in time. The British right on their heels, but the army is saved. And we celebrate that event every year in Halifax County. We remember it as the crossing of the Dan, and it is certainly appropriate that we should do that. It is one of the most significant episodes in the Revolutionary War. I'm sort of embarrassed to say I have not yet seen Ken Burns' documentary, but I've been told by multiple people that it somehow didn't make it into the documentary. And those of us who understand, we people who live and breathe the Southern Theater have been experiencing that for years, but that is a hugely important episode that all Americans should know about. The saving of the American army by crossing the river. But here's where I think we're dropping the ball. That is not the end of the story. Because Greene got his army to safety. And a normal general might well have said, whoa, that was a close call, and I'm going to go into winter quarters. I'm going to let my men rest. I'm going to wait till the roads dry out and there's something for the horses to eat. I'm going to get reinforced and we'll take them up in the spring. That's not what Greene did. A week after crossing the river, a week after being chased all the way across North Carolina and barely making it, he crosses back across the river and goes after Cornwallis. 10 days after he crossed the river, his whole army is back on the south side of the Dan, moving towards Cornwallis. Cornwallis, as soon as Greene got across the river, he goes back to Hillsborough and puts out some bombastic, pompous statement about how he's chased the rebels out of the province, and he's declaring how he's rescued North Carolina. But that's why Greene couldn't do it. He said, I can't let the people of North Carolina, the patriots in North Carolina, think we've given up on them. Even though I don't have my reinforcements yet, even though he still knew if he fought Cornwallis in that condition he would lose, he takes that risk. He goes back at him and hopes that he's going to get those reinforcements in time. And again, the armies spar. Cornwallis is trying to bring Tory loyalist reinforcements to his army. Greene is doing everything he can to prevent that happening, and by the way, does it magnificently. By the time the Battle of Guilford Courthouse rolls around, there are thousands of patriot militia in Greene's army. There are essentially no loyalist militia in Cornwallis's army. But March 15, 1781 is the climactic event. This is when the two armies come to blows at what is now Greensboro. Greene was going to attack Cornwallis, but he got intelligence saying Cornwallis is coming, he's coming this way, he's marching toward me. So therefore, he took Morgan's advice, and he followed the same strategy that General Morgan used to defeat Tarleton at Cowpens. Greene lays out his army in 3 parallel lines. He puts 1,000 North Carolina militiamen on the front line. He puts the Virginia militia a few hundred yards back on the second line, and he puts his Continentals, his best, his professional Continental troops on the third line. And he says to those men in the North Carolina line, he says, look, you're to fire 2, 3 times, do all the damage you can, aim for the officers, and when you have to retreat, fall back and rally behind the second line. Or, I'm sorry, behind the third line. He tells the Virginians in the second line, you do the same thing, same orders. Fire, do as much damage as you can, 2, 3 shots if you can, and then drop back. And when it gets to the third line, they're going to be so depleted, so worn down, we're going to be able to stop them there, counterattack, and defeat them. That was Morgan's strategy at Cowpens exactly. So how does it shake out? The North Carolina militia are laid out behind a rail fence in front of a plowed field. It's about 80 yards of plowed field before a wood line. Greene would say, this is the most formidable defensive position I've ever seen. The Carolina militiamen lay down, they put their muskets on the bottom rail of that fence, and the British have to come out of those woods and march toward them. There's a lot of controversy about what happened on the front line. Some North Carolinians that day fought bravely, many did. But the fact is that many panicked, they fired too soon, they threw their guns down and ran away. They did not rally behind anybody, they just went home. The first line melts away without doing the kind of damage, certainly, that Greene had hoped for. Now the British advance on that second line. 2 brigades of Virginians. You got Lawson's brigade on the right side of the New Garden Road, the north side, I guess. You got Stevens on the other side, Stevens' brigade. Lawson's brigade is routed almost immediately. Lawson thought he saw a chance to flank the British. He himself flanked. They're gone with very few casualties. Here's the thing, and this is when the rubber meets the road as far as getting your independence. If Stevens' brigade of Virginians behaves the same way the North Carolinians did, the same way Lawson's brigade did, it's over. They're just going to roll right over them. They're going to hit those Continentals without having been suffering much damage. They're going to run right over them. That army could very well be destroyed. There's not going to be a 4th Southern Army. This is it. Carolina's gone for good. Virginia's probably gone for good as well. It may be the end of the war. I think it's fair to say the stakes were pretty high. So what happened? Those men, Stevens' brigade, were ordered to fire 2, 3 times if you can. They didn't obey that order. They fired, in many cases, every round of ammunition they had. They fought on that line for 20 minutes. They turned back 3 British attacks. They fought there until Stevens himself had been shot off of his horse. Greene, who had no regard for militia, said later the Virginians behaved nobly, gallantly. Those same men, some of the same men who dropped their guns and ran at Camden, fought incredibly bravely that day at Guilford Courthouse, inflicted a tremendous amount of damage on the British before dropping back. So that by the time they did drop back, were forced back. Greene could inflict even more damage on the third line, could do an orderly withdrawal. If those men from here in Southern Virginia and Stevens' brigade had not performed so magnificently that afternoon at Guilford Courthouse, we might not have won our independence. And I single them out because it's a story that's not sufficiently well known, but it's not the only one. I mean, I could, even if I was just talking about Guilford, I could say similar things about William Washington's cavalry or Charles Lynch's riflemen, or so many men who laid it on the line that day. Many of them gave their lives that day. It was because of that Cornwallis could not continue to press on to Virginia. He had 25% casualties at Guilford Courthouse. He had to take his army to Wilmington to resupply, where he could bring ships into the port that could supply him. And from there, he makes the fatal decision to march up the coast of North Carolina into Virginia, where he has an appointment with destiny waiting for him at Yorktown. General Greene says to himself, well, I'm going to continue south. Cornwallis will have to follow me if I move back towards South Carolina. Well, Cornwallis didn't. But Greene goes south. And Greene, so many times, Greene says once, here's what we do. We fight, we get beat, we get up, we fight again. And that's what he did, time after time, knocking off those British posts, driving them back. By the end of 1781, North Carolina is Patriot controlled again. South Carolina, Patriot controlled again. Georgia, Patriot controlled again, liberated, except for the 3 port cities where the British could control with their navies. Now, this, I submit, is the reason we have our independence. Not just because Congress declared it, that was essential, that was important, but because the Patriots endured, bore the hardships, fought the battles, risked their lives, and in some cases gave their lives. And we must never forget that. I want to close, I think the sentiment is captured beautifully in a poem that Greensboro poet Ellen Dowdell Hunley wrote in 1892 as part of the dedication of the Guilford Battlefield Park. And this was published at that time, and it's called Guilford Battleground. Here's what she wrote. Shall they be unremembered, these heroes of old? Their graves forgotten, their stories untold? Shall time in his flight bear their prestige away, and the deeds they have done be the thought of a day? Ah, no. From this spot let a pillar arise, and the gray of the stone pierce the blue of the skies. Let the evergreen spring where their ashes repose, and plant over them sleeping the lily and the rose. All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. I don't know if we're doing Q&A. I'm happy to. All right. If not, I will turn this off.
Could you tell us about your book and where to purchase it?
Oh, thank you for that. Well, yes. So, some of you know I wrote some novels that people liked, but I was going to write a history of the Cowpens to Guilford campaign. That's what I set out to do. And after reading the books that have already been written on it, I said, I don't have anything else to say, right? So I decided that it's been well told what happened. So let me make a stab at writing what it felt like. So that's what this book is supposed to be. It's told from multiple perspectives. There's patriots, there's militiamen, there's continentals, there's Tories, there's British, there's slaves, there's free people. But it tries to tell what it was like. And it concentrates on episodes of those 3 months right here in this area leading up to the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. So all the great heroes are in here, as well as some fictional characters. Now I agree with you, Jarred. I have never been a great fan of, I don't understand as a history buff why you take a great story from history and change it to make it into a movie or something. Is the history itself not interesting enough? I don't get that, because it is. There's no reason to do that. So there's nothing changed about history in this book, unlike so many things that we see. So anyway, thank you for asking. It's available on Amazon or any bookstore that you like. You can also, if you're, you can get it from your library. Check it out before you sink the $20 out of it.
What's the title of the book?
Oh, it's called Let a Pillar Arise. Let a Pillar Arise. Sorry. And anyway. All right. Thanks again. I appreciate the invite and enjoyed talking with you. Now I can't cut it off. Can't turn it on. I can't cut it off. All right. Thanks, Jarred. I appreciate it.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but I am walking away definitely more informed than I was when I got here. Thank you all for coming out. Like I told you before, if you have not had a chance to go visit the mobile museum, it is open until 6 o'clock, so feel free to go on over there. I'm sure they wouldn't mind stamping a few more books for y'all and a few more tallies their clicker. But thank you all for coming out today, and we look forward to seeing y'all next year, next August. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you.
He was talking about the Virginia coming down and being so successful. But I was curious that ones from here
Didn't make it.
So what Virginia?
From all over. All basically budget. We, Henry County Militia had the ability to make it, but Green